Good morning. It is good to be with you this morning. My name is Reverend Christopher Rowe, and I serve as a senior minister here at Fountain Street Church, a church where love and justice and hope and faith and joy are the shared works of this church's 155-year ministry. And on behalf of everyone who calls this their home, be it here in these pews or virtually somewhere or some time from now, please let me welcome you to this time of worship with one another. I have not been here for 3 Sundays, and that is very challenging for me. For the past 2 weeks we were away, and that's the longest I've ever been away from Fountain Street, and Jonathan and I thank you all for that time of rest. And the Sunday before that, we had a snowstorm and our services were canceled. So unbeknownst to me, it's been a bit of a break, and I have been eager to be back here with all of you. So it is good to be in worship with you this morning, and it is good to be here on this joy-filled and sunny day. These are the kind of days we long for in winter here. As we prepare our hearts and our beings and our spirits for this time with one another, I want to call you into this time of community with the words of Jan Richardson's poem, And Blessing, Blessing in the Chaos. Will you please take a breath, center yourselves, and prepare yourself for this time of worship. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim upon you and your heart, that have made a home inside of you, that go with you even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness or feel the grace that has once fashioned you. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans you, and let depart all that keeps you within its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet places that lies beneath the chaos, where you will find the peace that you never imagined was possible, and you can see what still shimmers even inside the storm. Friends, as we draw into this time with one another, let us all join together and greet one another in the peace of love, and you will be called back with our gathering hymn. The touchstone theme of our gathering this morning is on the topic of change, transition, growth, movement forward. And so the ancient reading comes to us from Rumi as translated by Goldman Barks, a familiar one, The Guest House. Hear how this ancient and contemporary paraphrasing alike call us into the awareness of transition. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, an awareness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whomever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. This morning's contemporary witness on the touchstone of transition and movement forward comes to us from Christine McDougall's poem, Liminal. Hear these words as they call us into this time with one another. Liminal. On the threshold, the space between, where the questions tug, and the next step is not yet formed, but it is forming. Urgency is forbidden. The liminal space has its own gestation and requires patience, dreaming, and conversation. Intimate, loving conversation with the self, with the world, and others. This is what nurtures maturing. The liminal space is a space of grace. You are held by its tender embrace. To struggle against it will only prolong your journey. So relax, breathe, and breathe again. Sooner or later, the next page will be turned, and all will be revealed to you, I promise. The path forward will become evident, I promise. But in its time, in its time. The astute among you can tell I'm not Reverend Jody. And that's where we're going to start for a moment. I shared this news with her permission. Many of you know Reverend Jody has been ill since November, and she is currently in the hospital at Blodgett. She's been there for a little while, and she will continue to be there for a little while she undergoes treatment and testing to manage what's going on and figure out what's going on. And so we share our hearts and our greatest support with her and her husband Dan as they navigate this. So I wasn't planning to be up here, though Jonathan and I were able to spend a few hours with her and Dan at the hospital yesterday, and we kind of talked through what her hope was for today. And so I come, hopefully carrying the spirit of what she wanted to talk about on the theme of transition and change and growth and our future. And this is also my greatest nightmare in life, which is writing a sermon like the night before church. And she knows that, so it was not lost on her. So we find ourselves yet again at the portal of another season here at Fountain Street Church, particularly as we anticipate my departure as senior minister here in June. And that comes with an infinite host of possibilities and potentialities for how we might approach this transition as a church that's committed to health, wholeness, and healing. And of course, a church that's committed to hope. Personally and professionally, I find myself among the community of those who believe that hiring a trained and skilled interim minister is not only the right path forward for our community, but also the healthy and healing and hopeful path for our church to pursue together. And notice that I continue to use language with you like we and together because I still feel that this interim season is an extension of the ministry and the work that we've done together for the past 6 years. I care deeply about this place. Undoubtedly, we've been through a lot over the last 5, 10, 15, and even 20 years around these halls. And as we observe the 100th anniversary of this church building, yesterday, in fact, and honor the 155-year ministry that we are shepherding and stewarding and supporting, sustaining into its shared future, it's time for us to welcome into our fold a trained professional who brings with them distinct skills and distinguished training, and who can not only help continue to sustain the growth and the flourishing and the development of the contemporary church, but also help us in exploring and imagining our vision, our values, our mission, our core, and our identity, through collectively exploring our past, collaboratively assessing our present, and creatively imagining a new future. Before I continue to go on, let us take a moment just to remember that the interim and the work of the interim is not to simply be a substitute senior minister. He or she or they are not called into this place and into the legacy of this church simply to keep this pulpit warm for the next settled minister to come in and maintain status quo. Because the work of the interim minister, much like my own work that I've shared with you, is to journey with you and support you as we look into these historic mirrors and these futuristic windows in pursuit of a more healthy and whole ministry for the next season that you will all share with one another beyond Reverend Jody and myself. In his resource notebook for interim ministry, Lee Early suggests 3 basic ways that the church may actually view or perceive the interim period between ministers. Each of these reflects a concept of the church's ministry, and each of these have likely been expressed and experienced within our own church walls. First, the interim season may be viewed as a time to move through quickly. In fact, as quickly as possible, so that the church can get on to its real future. In the extreme embodiment of this paradigm, this view tends to think of the church's identity as that of being the senior minister's identity. It also views the church's mission as being the senior ministry's mission and ministry, or whatever it is that the senior minister does as an individual. It views the laity as being served and inspired by the senior minister, but also simply just following at the senior minister's direction. In this view, the power rests in the hands of the minister or in the hands of the minister and a few other chosen people. And in this view, the congregation sees the interim period as a period to move through as quickly as possible so that we can get back on track to the real future, and more importantly, to the next real leader who will ultimately tell us who we are and where we're going next. In a less extreme but equally problematic view of interim seasons, there is the posture and the viewpoint that the interim period is simply a time and a chapter in a season that is to be tolerated, but not prolonged any longer than necessary. In its extreme example of this view tends to see the church as the fellowship and the pastor as the key part of that fellowship. It still views the church's ministry and its identity as that of whoever the senior minister is, but there's at least some room for the congregants to influence that identity, if not entirely inform it. This view tends to see the laity as doing the work of the church if and only if there's no minister there to lead, and when the minister shares that power with the laity. And when there is no minister, power becomes unevenly distributed with lay leaders and congregants who pick up the responsibilities temporarily. In these systems and in these churches, a large number of people view the interim period as necessary and as something we should probably tolerate, but hopefully for not very long. Finally, there are those congregations and those congregants who see the interim period as offering opportunities for growth and change, transformation, and flourishing that they believe will ultimately stabilize, strengthen, and sustain the congregation into a vibrant and flourishing future. People who view the interim ministry in this way see the interim time as providing opportunities which will gently and greatly benefit the church as it moves into a shared future. In its extreme manifestation, this view tends to see the church as the people of God, or as in our case, the people of Fountain Street Church, as it moves towards a shared identity. The church's ministry is seen as how the church actually lives into its vision and its mission together, with the minister only being one part of that work. The community partners in ministry with one another and with the minister, with each individual being a source of creativity and energy and innovation and imagination for the church's life and outreach, as well as what its future might look like. In this model and in this view of ministry, power is shared by the minister and the community equally, both leaders and non-leaders, and thus the collective whole sees the interim season as a time to ensure that everyone is equally invested in collaboratively looking at our past, constructively looking at our present, and creatively imagining our future. I would encourage each of us and all of us to take a moment here and reflect on how we might relate to these three viewpoints of interim ministry. This being Fountain Street Church, I know there are an infinite number of ways in which we might identify with them. So let's just take a breath and think for a minute. There's no right or wrong answer to this question other than honestly. Do we see the liminal season of interim work as one that must be dealt with as quick as possible in pursuit of calling another senior minister who we have the faith will tell us who we are and where we're going? Do we see the transitional chapter of interim work as one in which we might finally reach our highest potential and our fullest possibilities in pursuit of every individual in the church being part of the work to get it done? Or do we find ourselves somewhere in between, unable to completely commit to that long process, but aware that some kind of work must be done? How do you personally feel about our church and yourself within the church and this interim chapter? So one of the major points that Reverend Jody was hoping to bring to you this morning, and that I will do my best to honor, is that this work is done through 5 specified and specific developmental tasks. And these tasks exist beyond religious traditions or denominational affiliations. In fact, some of you in this room might actually recognize them from corporate and nonprofit organizations as well. From colleges to corporations to foundations to philanthropic boards, interim seasons are often supported and sustained by these 5 developmental tasks. These are universally agreed upon and professionally supported best practices in organizational theory that help churches and corporations and nonprofits alike manage transitions in such a way that they are well prepared for more vibrant and flourishing futures, especially compared to those who do not harness the power and the potential and the promise of an intentional interim period. So the first developmental task of this interim work is just coming to terms with our history. Coming to terms with our history. The departure of one minister and the arrival of another is a major and notable and noteworthy part of a church's story, particularly in churches like this one. Traditional interim ministry training espouses that during these periods of transitions between ministers and other settled leadership, one of the indispensable tasks is to tell and retell and tell and retell and accept and affirm the congregation's history. To recognize that one chapter is ultimately coming to a close, and to honor the feelings and the emotions that are being generated by all of these changes. Lee Early, who I quoted early, suggests that how well the congregation deals with its history will determine how well it will move forward and deal with its future. And that's something that I know we all care about deeply here at Fountain Street Church. Coming to terms with our history means reviewing it, learning from it, and deciding on those elements and those parts that we want to retain from our past and bring into our future, a theme that you've heard me speak about before. And before moving on to the next developmental task, I do want to underscore that the central focus of coming to terms with our history is to deal with history so that we don't become bogged down by our history, but rather we become freed by our history so that we can move on into our future. Hear that again. In pursuit of health and wholeness and healing and hope, we must come to terms with history and deal with parts of our history so that we can move forwards and onwards into our future. The second developmental task of interim seasons is to collectively and collaboratively understand and accept a shared identity. Kind of scary here. Unsurprisingly, from time to time, our self-image or our identity or our way of understanding ourselves in the world in a congregation becomes outdated, if not a bit antiquated. And at other times, identities in congregations have become enmeshed significantly with the personality or the leadership of an outgoing senior minister. The interim period is a time when the congregation needs to reconnect with its core, and subsequently its core identity, and ask of themselves, who are we, especially now that our minister's gone? Who are we now that our minister is gone? In this essential developmental task, it is espoused that the congregation needs to gain a conscious understanding of how it now views itself. How do we now understand ourselves? Not once how it was viewed by the world around it or how it once viewed itself, but how it now views itself and is viewed in the evolving world outside of its walls. One of the reasons that I'm so enthusiastic about interim seasons is because it provides for us an intentional period of looking inward in a time of deep introspection that seldom occurs during other parts of a church's life. The introspective study of self can reveal a great deal of attitudes that the church has about its mission, its vision, its core values. And more often than not, it opens an invitation to reshape and reimagine its own self-image, which ties us back to that first element of developmental work, which is to look at our history, figure out what we need to deal with from it, and imagine a new self-image for our future. So then we have the third developmental task during the interim search, which simply looks at the shifting power within the organization. And this happens in all organizations. As in any other organization, institution, or system, the departure of a leader can create kind of a vacuum. And in churches, with a laterally established power structure and a horizontally structured decision-making, kind of like Fountain Street's, new power structures can and do form. And more importantly, when shifts of power do occur, there may be a variety of conflicts that can bubble up, especially as our old histories are revisited and reconciled and new futures are reborn. And so it's during the interim season that the key task of understanding the power structures in our church and who influences those power structures becomes crucial to our organizational health and our institutional healing. During the interim period, shifts of power can be facilitated in a variety of ways, but it is essential that it is done transparently and with public acknowledgement to the community. During any transition period like the one we're entering, it's going to be essential that we look at the shifts of power not only in and within and around my departure, but also throughout the 155 years of this church's history. It's important work to do. So the fourth piece of developmental interim ministry is a bit more straightforward for our community, but it's still something we need to discern, and I know we have in the past. Traditionally, during the interim period for other congregations, they look and they reevaluate and they rethink and they reimagine their denominational affiliations. Well, we don't have those linkages here. And even though we are fiercely independent in this 21st century version of Fountain Street Church, we would be remiss if we did not revisit this reality and at the very least name and reclaim this independence and why it's so important for this church. As we revisit and we retell and we reclaim our history and imagine for a future that is shared and loving and flourishing, it's imperative and it is essential that we understand the value and the purpose of our independence and own it as part of our future that we're writing together. We cannot take it for granted. We have to own it. And so if you've been counting along, this leads us to developmental task 5, the 5th and final development task, which is done when we commit to a new leader, we commit to a new style of leadership, and we commit to a new future. During the interim period, it is essential that as a congregation, we are ready to make a commitment to a new ministerial leader that we're going to call. If a congregation isn't ready to do that or welcome the work of a new minister and with a new minister, it will in effect undermine its own ministry and its future potential. And it will sabotage all of that work that was done in the first 4 developmental tasks. The task that needs to be completed before we do a senior minister search is the prior 4. Understanding our history, understanding the power shifts throughout that history, understanding who we are as an independent church, and of course, understanding how all of this is going to support the next chapter. In essence, think of the 5th and final developmental step as an affirmation for everything that the church will accomplish during this interim season. And I recognize that this is a lot of information. In fact, I once vowed I would never do one of those 1 through 5 sermons, and here we are. But I do believe that if you can digest it, and I do believe that if we can have a properly trained leadership person in an open posture, many of these tasks will feel like second nature for this congregation and will make us set up well for a healthy and happy future together. Already, I have heard of many of you beginning to retell and reclaim pieces of our history and imagine what might need to be dealt with as we imagine a new future. I believe that our chaplain, Margie Dirks-Peterson, might have done some of that work with you last week and perhaps Reverend Jody the week before. Already, I've seen the ways in which small groups and large groups and committees and boards are openly discussing our church's identity, our core values, and our mission in light of the world around us. And I'm hearing about the ways in which groups and teams are anticipating the coming shifts in power and how they can be a part of healthy transitions in light of those very shifts. If you take a breath and you ground yourself in the eternal now for a moment and silence the clangor of anxiety that often comes with these kinds of transitions, you will recognize that much of this work is second nature for our community. But it's also work that needs to be done with intention, which is where an intentional interim season will serve us well, even into our future together. I know a lot of you feel like a departure or a change, including ones like my own, can feel like a major setback for the church. Whereas many of us hope for continued growth and vitality, an interim season can feel uncomfortably liminal and distracted from a sense of vibrancy. But if a church, and more specifically our church, can do this season, if we can use this next season beyond my departure to come to terms with our history, discover a new identity, accept the shifts in power, claim our independence as an asset, and commit ourselves to a new leader, new leadership, and a new vision, if we can do those 5 things, I do believe that our church will know health and vitality and flourishing together. The tools are there for us if we're willing to reach for them and get to work with them as a beloved church, and I do think we have the capacity to do that. My biggest piece of dissonance with my message for you this morning was that it felt dry of any depth of spirituality. And as I was sitting over there listening to the choir and just kind of thinking about our good news for this morning, I realized this is intensely spiritual stuff. Self-awareness, enlightenment, transformation is deeply spiritual, and we see these 5 developmental tasks happening in all of the world's great traditions. In my own tradition, as I thought through it, we see the histories being told and retold again and again throughout the Old and New Testaments as they recall their past and imagine what they want to be different in their future. We see them recognizing shifts of power. That's a huge part of these biblical canons as they think about the ways in which certain things were problematic and new groups will take over and will find better ways of being community. Where do we even begin with identity shifting? That is such an important part of the biblical narrative, as these ancient Israel communities kind of grow and manifest and turn into these vibrant and flourishing beloved communities. And of course, leadership and shifts in power, we see over and over the ways in which they find themselves. How are they linked to other cultures and traditions and nations and communities? And how are they willing and open and able to accept new leaders and new visions in the future? This is second nature to us, beloved, and I do believe we are well poised for this, and I do believe it is what is going to take this church into the future. I know that's possible, and I am so excited to see for this place. As we prepare for a meditation and prayer, I'd like to revisit the reality that this church is 100 years old. 100 years old yesterday was their first service in this space. You can almost put yourself back in that frame of mind, what they must have felt like. Undoubtedly, they knew liminality. Losing a building, shifts in leadership, they knew transition. So I want to invite you to take a breath and allow that to be our touchstone for this morning's meditation. Will you just close your eyes and take a breath as I invite you into this? Spirit of time and transition, liminality and opportunity. We can only imagine the histories that were being told some 100 years ago. The parts of their past they knew would carry them into their future. The shifts in leadership and power. Their connection not only to their fellow Baptists, but also to their fellow Grand Rapidians and one another. Be with us as we surrender to the courage and the determination and the openness that we know our ancestors once held for us. Help us to see this liminality and this coming liminal season as one of excitement and joy, opportunity and growth. Help us to not see it as an inhibition to our future, but rather a wonderful and exciting part of our future. We thank you for the ancestors that stewarded this ministry for us. We thank you for one another, who is now the beloved community stewarding it together. And we thank you for those named and unnamed in our future, and those we will never know, who will be grateful for the work we did in this season. Blessed be, and may it be so.
Good morning. For over 40 years, Fountain Street Church has had an annual memorial concert. And the memorial concert has been in place to honor those people that we've lost, those people that we hold in our memories and in our hearts. We've done it also to honor people that we respect, that we love, so it's not those who have only passed, but people you respect. If you want to collect money from me, you could do that. That's fine. What we're looking for today is that we're going to give you a little bit of an insight as to what we're doing this year, and so it's a great honor for me. By the way, my name is Chip Wall, and with my co-chair, Mr. George Zeiterveen, we're chairing the fundraising aspect of the memorial concert this year. So it's with great pleasure that I get to introduce someone here today, the Fountain Street Church Choir taskmaster, boss, and phenomenal choral director, Mr. Austin McWilliams, to tell you about this spring's concert.
Good morning, everyone. I suspect that most of you were at attendance at last year's oratorio considering Matthew Shepard. That was a huge success both for this church and for the music program at this church in so many ways. We had a huge audience that night, larger than any audience that we've ever had in the history of the oratorio at this church, somewhere around 800 people. We also set a fundraising goal last year larger than had ever been set before, and we met it, and then we surpassed it, and then we profited more for the choir fund than we ever have in the history of the oratorio. We also had a large choir that consisted of many members, both from within this church and from throughout the community. Some of those members are now in our choir today, and some of those members continue to participate in our oratorio this year. So the opportunity for growth with this oratorio project is extremely, extremely exciting for the music program at this church. This year we're doing Mass by Leonard Bernstein. And in the spirit of growth, this piece ought to push all of us to grow in many ways, even further than we did last year. And it's also a bigger project than last year's was, both in terms of the number of participants and in terms of the money that it's going to take to pull something like this off. So it's going to require over 120 artists in total. We have about 80 adult singers, including members of our own choir, singers from West Michigan Opera Project, which is Sarah Fosse's organization that regularly performs here at this church. I'm also the director of choral activities at Aquinas College. I have about 30 Aquinas students who are going to be performing in the work as well. We'll have a 20-person children's chorus, a 15-person orchestra, 3 dancers from Deos Contemporary Ballet, which is a new ballet company here in town, a director and a star of the show who is the celebrant, who are both coming from out of town in order to work on this project. So it's massive in scale. But the opportunity for success presents itself once more. So I'm asking for your generosity today. I believe, Chip, are you going to come back and talk about the plate in a second? So some of the plate today will go toward fundraising for this oratorio. But to give you an idea of the meaning of the work itself, aside from just the scope of the work, the general crux is that we have a society that is in tatters. We have competing forces that doubt the necessity of the church in modern society, that doubt their belief in God. And we witness a priest, a Catholic priest, a celebrant, we witness his spiritual breakdown throughout the work as he faces these competing forces. And without giving too much away, I will just conclude by saying that the moral of the story is a bit ambiguous, the way that the show ends, but what I take from it is that more than any of these worldly things, what we need is one another, which is, I think, a message that's particularly prescient for this church at this time. So I'd really appreciate your support today, and I'll hand it back over to Chip. Thank you.
So Austin indicated over 120 different artists, large productions, so you know what I'm going to ask for, large donations, because it's going to take a lot to put this on. So you will look for in this next week mailing, which will give you outlines of different levels of sponsorship. You can come together, as we've received funds from book clubs already, individual people, in honor of people who have passed, in honor of people who you just love. So let's kick in. We're gonna be back periodically and let you know how we're doing. But one of the things that drew us to Fountain Street Church is the beauty of the art in this building, the beauty of the music in this building, the walls that the art hangs on. All of this is beauty. And Austin's vision of what he wants this Mass to be is spectacular as well. So we encourage you to take part, and that gives you the ability to be a part of this production. So thank you for your time and consideration. Today in the plate at Fountain Street, can I go ahead? At the plate, why not? The plate, 50% of what we collect typically goes out into the community and serves our social justice team. The other half is to keep the lights on, the heat, and all that kind of good stuff. This today, 50% will go to the Mass, and in a few weeks, Austin will be back and he will actually be delivering the message, so look for that, the 3rd of March, I think it is, right? Something like that. Look for that, and we will get 100% of the plate. So if you are saving your allowance, I'm giving you a good month's heads up. So if the ushers will come forward and take the plate, if you would, please. Thank you.
He said everything. Before we go, we just have a few little bits of things to share with you. The first of which is that the beautiful flowers on our chancel today are in honor and of memory of Andrea Bear-Petit. We gathered here yesterday, and we had a wonderful celebration of her life. It was a time of warm fellowship and connection, and so we continue to hold Jack in our heart and Andrea in our spirit as we go through this week. Thank you for those beautiful flowers. We also want to lift up our gratitude to everybody who made this morning possible, whether it was upstairs or online or Jonathan or our choir in Austin. We are so grateful for everyone who makes every week possible here at Fountain Street Church. It just moves beautifully, but it's not without some commitment and intention. Friends, as you go forward from this time with one another and you move into this beautiful week with sunshine and a little more grace from the temperatures, I have a little homework for you. I want you to hold those 5 developmental tasks close to your heart, and I want you to do it in tandem, not just a complete abstract, with the recognition that this building is now in its 100 and going on first year of ministry. As I said earlier in our invitation with one another, undoubtedly they had to look at their history, but decide what pieces of it were important for its future. This space and its purpose are very different than the original building on this site. Undoubtedly, they had to think about the shifts of power and the shifts of who was going to shepherd this place well into its future. Undoubtedly, they had to think about who they were as a church, not just a Baptist church at the time, but a partner in the community, making space, making grace, and making hope in West Michigan. Even in 1924. Undoubtedly, they had to think about who their leaders would be in the future, who would occupy this building, and how they might use it well beyond themselves. And undoubtedly, they had to think about how their impact and their identity would influence the world. So go into the week with these 5 tasks as a second nature to you, thinking about the ways in which we've done it before, and we will do it again with grace and hope and joy and, of course, love for one another. Go in love, go in peace, and we'll see you next week.